Nicholas, would you mind announcing how to use the interpretation?
Yeah, sure. Para los que van a escuchar en español, la interpretación está disponible y tienen que conectarse en la parte de abajo de su pantalla. Van a encontrar un globito que se parece a un mundo, o si tiene el teléfono, unos 3 puntitos o dice más, y ahí tienen que hacer clic y escoger la función de lenguaje o interpretación y escoger español. Y de esa manera van a estar escuchando todo lo que se dice en español. Gracias.
Thank you, Nicholas.
We're ready.
Okay, so thank you, committee members and member of the public, for being here with us for our very first meeting. Officially calling this meeting to order, and I'll take roll call quickly. Committee member Bogner.
Present.
Committee member Gator.
Present.
Committee member Holt.
Present.
Committee member Mahler.
Mahler, present.
Committee member Marshall.
Present.
Committee member Phil Marshall.
Present.
Committee member Settles.
Present.
Thank you. We have a quorum. So we wanted to start out with introductions and get to know everyone before we jump into our work. I first want to say thank you all for applying to be on this committee. This is going to be a 9-month process of helping the city council get to a point where we adopt a map that will be used for district elections for the next 10 years. So it's important work, and we're happy to have you all here and appreciate your time and your participation. Jonathan Roisman is, let me introduce myself actually. I'm Jessica Blair, and I'm the communications director and city clerk, and I've been with the city for about 6 years now. Jonathan Roisman is our deputy city clerk. He's been here almost 4 years. And then we have our city attorney, Catherine Ingberg. Catherine, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah, it's a pleasure to be here tonight with you. I'll be covering the Brown Act and the Public Records Act training. Most likely I won't be joining you for your work and for your meetings unless there's specific issues that come up that require me to be here, but it's great to be here this evening. I'm actually with a law firm, Shoot Mahali and Weinberger. We're contract with the city, and I've been city attorney since 2017.
Thanks, Catherine. And then we have our city manager, Bob Nisbet. Bob?
Sure, thank you, Jessica. I'd like to just echo the comment that Jessica made and thank the committee members for agreeing to volunteer your time to do this. It is very important. It is going to take a fair amount of time. I think she just said it's a 9-month process. And so I think it's very commendable that you guys chose to step up and engage in your community and take on a committee assignment that's really important to the work the city does for the community. So thank you very much. I will attend these meetings occasionally when I can. I'm interested in the process. Jessica is leading the process, and she has a very good consultant along with us, who you'll meet in a second, I assume. And my purpose will just be, as a city manager, I'm interested in how it goes. And so when I can, I will occasionally attend the meetings if I can. So look forward to meeting you virtually and also hopefully someday in person.
Thanks, Bob. And then we have our demographer consultant, Shalise. Shalise, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Shalise Tilton. I'm with National Demographics. We've been helping cities for over 40 years. We've helped over 368 cities transition to districts, and now we have nearly 200 clients who are going through the same process that you're going through. In my past life, I was a city clerk. I've known Jessica for a number of years. Your city is very lucky to have her. And I retired from that profession after 25 years, but I wanted to stay connected. And so here I am, and happy to be leading you through the process. I had the good fortune of starting the process with you when you began districts, and then I headed out to Spain and someone else finished the project. So I didn't get to see the final map adopted, but I'm happy to be here now. Thanks.
Thanks, Shalise. And then each of the committee members, would you like to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about yourself and your interest in serving on this committee? And we'll start with committee member Bogner, as you're in my top left corner.
Thank you. I moved to Half Moon Bay in 1992 and feel incredibly at home here, and have been involved in various aspects of the community and such, and know so many people in town. And in my professional life, I've kind of spent half my life working with programmers and people over the Hill, and half of it deeply involved in the chess community, being a chess master, and gradually, gotten involved in consulting and helping people I know with, enough different things that I've sort of lost track of what I do. But I've got a very high value on making sure things work well in the city, and I'm glad to be able to try to contribute here to understand the lay of the land, the requirements, and to see that we fulfill them well. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee member Gator.
Sorry. Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, I'm pleased to be part of this committee and to put some faces to the names. I'm a bit further away from home than Steve at the moment. I'm in the Midwest this week. So it's getting late here, just as a hint in terms of time management. I moved to the Frenchman's Creek neighborhood in town in 1999, and I've lived there ever since. I just retired a couple of years ago from a career in the pharmaceutical industry as a bench scientist, and then a project manager and operations manager. And I really wanted to get involved with this redistricting process because I think it's so important for us as a community and for the city to get this right, and to make sure that we can draw up districts that make sense for the community to move forward over the course of the next 10 years. So I look forward to working with city staff and everybody else on the committee to make this happen.
Thank you. Committee member Holt.
Hi, my name is Marin Holt. I'm originally from Redwood City and then slowly made my way via Skyline over to the coast about 15 years ago. I actually teach over the Hill. I teach high school government and economics. I'm in the middle college program that's housed on the Kenyatta College campus. And so I love teaching civics and government, and redistricting is actually one of the topics that I cover every year. And so it's always one of those kind of challenging things to make interesting, but I think once you can, it's so relevant and so important to our democracy and how it's run. And I constantly am reinforcing with my students that all politics are local. And so we really have to be engaged in local politics and understand local politics if we're to understand anything else. So that's my interest in being on the committee, and I'm excited to serve.
Thank you. Committee member Settles.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I purchased my home in 1998. I'm in the Kehoe community. We purchased in 1988, and we actually moved here in 2006. I'm a retiree as well. I retired as Human Resources Department Manager at BART, and also retired from City College as a business professor. So I'm totally retired now, and I really enjoy engaging in public dialogue and input. My past service has been with the San Mateo Retirement Board. I was on that board for 5 years, and also on the San Francisco Redevelopment Agency because I moved here from San Francisco. So I love public engagement. I like to see people engage and know what's going on in their community, and I hope to make a contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee member Phil Marshall.
Hi there, nice to meet you, everyone. Let's see, I moved to Half Moon Bay in 2013, having been in California since 2003. Before that, I grew up in the UK, so I'm originally from far away and now an immigrant. For work, I'm a scientist at Stanford. I do data analysis, trying to learn about the universe, doing cosmology. I'm also Deputy Director of Operations for Rubin Observatory, a big telescope that we're putting together. Over here, I'm an active follower of the City Council. And lately, I've been trying to look to give something back to my community using the professional skills I've picked up over the years. And I guess this year, more than ever, I'd like to see democracy done well. So that's what I'm here to help with, I hope.
Thank you. Committee member Claudia Marshall. Oh, you are muted.
I moved to Half Moon Bay in 2007. I moved from Woodside, where I raised my children, after having a career in the tech industry. Let's see. While in Woodside, I was for 18 years an appointed member of the Architecture Review Board as both chair and vice chair. Since moving here to the coast, I grew up in Connecticut near Long Island Sound, and so the ocean was always very compelling for me. So after my children were grown and launched, I moved here to the coast. And currently I am a portrait artist. I do children and pets, and I'm a volunteer at Gerasi Artist Retreat up off of Skyline. And the reason that I joined the committee was because I believe in outreach to all of the citizens, all the residents of our community, and in equity in terms of the public voice and the political voice. And so I'm glad and really quite honored to be part of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. And committee member Maller.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for including me in this process. I'm a relative newcomer to Half Moon Bay, having moved here with my wife in 2012 from over the hill. I'm also somewhat of a political neophyte, and yet I'm eager to try and contribute in whatever way I can to try and preserve and I think kind of help the city to evolve in a meaningful way to make sure that it will continue to reflect the sort of the profile and the needs of the community. And I'm really happy, and I have to say a shout out to an old friend of mine who used to engage me in serious political dialogue over the years, and I never really thought he would do it, but Robert Brownstone made the leap from my Passover table many years ago, and a good friend of our family, to being mayor of our wonderful town. And I thought, my goodness, you know, I need to pitch my hat in the ring as well. So kudos to Robert and everyone else who serves this great city, and I'd like to contribute a little bit myself. So thank you.
Thank you. And so the way that tonight's agenda is laid out, we do next have nomination of chair and vice chair. And I understand that, you know, you're all just meeting each other in this setting. And so we can push that toward the end of the agenda. We could even push it off to the next meeting. That's really at your discretion. I'm seeing head nods, so maybe we'll touch base on that again when we reach the end of the meeting. And so what we have for tonight is we wanted to make sure that you guys had all the information needed as we move forward in the process. And so I'll briefly go over the bylaws, the meeting calendar, as well as the council's charge, what they've asked of you and what they'd like to see in the end. And then Catherine will provide the overview on the Brown Act and the Public Records Act. Jonathan is going to give a history of when we transitioned in 2018 to district elections, so you have that context. And then Shalise will jump us into redistricting basics and kind of set us off as we head into the process here. And so let me share my screen with the first couple pages of your bylaws. We've kind of already dealt with getting members appointed and all of that, but you'll see the various districting criteria and discussion of the Fair Maps Act. These are all items that Shalise will go over during her presentation. And then we also have the transparency section, which talks about the Brown Act and the Public Records Act and all of the various different codes that govern open meetings. And Catherine will touch on that. And then there's the public engagement section, which kind of falls on me and Jonathan and our department of making sure that we're conducting these meetings in a way that is accessible to the public and that we are getting as much public outreach as we can to make sure the public is aware of the meetings in order to participate. And then some of the guidelines about the quorum, and a lot of this is just necessary that we need to have in bylaws, but a quorum of this body is 4 members. So for each of the meetings, we will need at least 4 of you to attend in order to hold the meeting. And you know, it would be great if all of you could attend, but we do understand over the course of the 9 months that things do come up. So Shalise and I have worked very hard over the last month getting this calendar finalized and making sure that we've got all the necessary meetings as well as the additional ones that the council has requested. And so we're this meeting tonight, and then you'll notice that there are 4 back-to-back Thursday night meetings, and then we have a break. So we'll have the next meeting will be a workshop on mapping in general, the legislation surrounding redistricting. And then the following week, we're going to have a workshop on the district model and election sequencing. And where this comes from is that the council at the end of your work would like for you to submit 2 draft maps. Currently, our map is 4 districts with an at-large elected mayor. The council would like to see 1 map that includes 5 districts, and then an additional map that includes 4 districts with an elected mayor. But then there's also the issue of, should that elected mayor serve a 2-year term or a 4-year term? And so that's the end goal of what we're trying to get to and what this committee will produce to the council. But we want to get as much public input into those issues as we can. And so we will hold one of the workshops specifically to talk about, you know, how many districts should we have and what should that look like? In election sequencing, what that means is you sequence out. So for example, in our last election, districts 1 and 3 were on the ballot. So in our next election under this current map, it would be districts 2 and 4 plus the at-large elected mayor. And so part of that, you know, 2 or 4-year term or simply the 5 districts is what would determine the election sequencing. And so we'll do as much public outreach as we possibly can to make sure that we can get as many people to that meeting as possible. And then we can talk about ways to get additional input in that. Maybe we put out a survey, maybe we schedule an additional workshop toward the end of the process if we feel it's necessary. That's really going to be up to all of you as we go through. Then we'll hold the 2 required public hearings on the next 2 Thursdays, and Shalise will talk about those a little more. But then there's a required lag time as we wait for the final census data, and then there's some state requirements that have to happen. So between public hearing 2 and then the rest of the meetings, we have to have that break. So it's a little heavy in the front, then you'll get a little break, and then you'll see we meet about once a month, and then in January it gets a little more focused as we are then developing the maps. And the council, the council will look at your focus maps in January at a special meeting, and then again in February. And then we're hoping for adoption on March 15th. And so we just wanted to get this mapped out to make sure everyone had it on their calendars and we can begin doing our outreach. Steve, did you have a question?
I just want to know whether it's, given how things are transitioning with COVID, et cetera, whether this schedule reflects any eventual transition to in-person live meetings versus the online meetings, or if we intend on having them all be, or, you know, a hybrid meeting where people could come in, because I always feel like these kinds of meetings can potentially be more productive when people are in a room together.
Correct. We can be virtual through the end of September. And so that was the plan, but we could certainly, if the committee wanted to, we could certainly hold one of the workshops in person, or either the public hearings. I would leave it up to the committee's discretion.
Right. I would just like to have that be maybe a point of discussion at some point, maybe not tonight, but at some point.
Okay. We're not quite ready for the hybrid meetings yet. So that's something to consider, but by the November 8th meeting and after, those will all be in person.
Great. Thank you.
And let's see, I think that was about what I was going to cover. Did anyone have any questions or comments on anything I've covered? And then we're going to head into the Brown Act training with Catherine.
Jessica, I just suggested we cover the topic that we got the question about before the meeting regarding the city council requirements for the committee members.
All right, so committee member Bogner brought up a question before we went live regarding some of the code sections that are referenced in the bylaws, and specifically the Form 700 requirement. So the city council, in deciding whether to use an independent redistricting commission or an advisory committee, wanted some of the requirements of an independent commission without the limitations of it. And so they wanted to add additional requirements for this committee, one of them most importantly being the Form 700. And they felt that given the work of this committee, that it was important for any financial interest to be disclosed. And so that is where the requirement of the Form 700 came into play. They also added that any committee members would be barred from serving on running for city council or serving on the planning commission for 4 years. And I believe those were the only two kind of major additional requirements that they placed on the committee. But that's the context of where that came from. Claudia?
I hope you're going to review the current district settings and what we're going to be looking at. You went over that very quickly and I was a little bit confused, but I'm presuming that we'll go into a lot of detail on those going forward.
We will, yeah. And Jonathan's going to cover the current map and the transition here after Catherine's presentation, and then Shalice will get really into it later toward the end of the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, or is your hand still raised? Okay, so if there are no other questions on that, I will turn it over to our city attorney. Oh, you're muted, Catherine.
Thank you, Jessica. Right, so I will jump right in and thank you for your attention to this topic. I told my family over dinner tonight that I would be doing a training on Brown Act and Public Records Act, and they said, "Oh, I hope your committee doesn't fall asleep." And I said, I am not worried about that. These are local government junkies, so I think this will be of a lot of interest. So I think the main takeaways I would say for this committee is to be mindful in discussing topics of redistricting with other committee members outside of actual notice meetings. That's probably the number one takeaway. And also to be very mindful of your use of email. And so I'll sort of get into some of the weeds, but I think those are two things to really keep in mind with respect to this training. Advance. All right, the Brown Act has been around since the 50s. It resides in the government code. Most of the time, if you have questions about it, Jessica is also a Brown Act whiz, so you can ask her questions, and then she and I consult frequently on these topics. In terms of the overall gist, this is of course California's open meeting law. It applies to local government, local agencies, city council, planning commission, advisory committees like yours. One really, we're in a really interesting time regarding the Brown Act because COVID-19 and the executive orders from the governor have really transformed how we do our public meetings during COVID. And it's going to be really interesting to see what happens after September 30th. Jessica mentioned that under the current order, we can continue Zoom meetings through September 30th. There's legislation pending that would potentially require cities to do hybrid models. Currently, that legislation is only proposed for larger cities, larger than Half Moon Bay. But I predict that there will be some changes to the Brown Act, given everyone's newfound familiarity with this Zoom format. The key, of course, is that local agency decision-making needs to be open and transparent, and it prohibits agencies from doing business outside of noticed public meetings. So key, meetings that take place in public and unless an exception applies, and the public needs to be given notice of the meeting, and that type of notice will depend on the type of meeting. We'll get into a little bit of the details there. So first, this is also really key. Well, what is a meeting? So we, of course, are having a meeting right now. It was noticed under the Brown Act. But a meeting is also any gathering of a majority of committee members to discuss a topic within the subject matter jurisdiction of the committee. So if 4 of you get together at the cafe and start talking about redistricting, all of a sudden that's a meeting. So that is, really important to keep in mind, and why, at a high level, to be very, very careful in terms of talking about redistricting with other committee members outside of these meetings. All right, so in addition to my example of 4 of you running into each other at a cafe, there's other ways that a meeting can happen, potentially, a lot of times inadvertently. So one other thing that we want to be mindful of are what we call daisy chain type of meetings. This is where committee member A talks to committee member B about a topic, and that member B talks to C, and then C talks to D, and all of a sudden you've got a quorum of committee members that have discussed a topic within the jurisdiction. Another thing to be careful of are what's referred to as hub and spoke meeting, the hub and spoke sequence, where you have a single committee member who has separate conversations with, at least 3 of you about a topic, and then all of a sudden, that committee member has basically gotten information from a quorum of committee members. So we want to be careful of serial meetings. One thing, it is okay to have individual briefings. So Jessica might want to, she might have individual briefings. Let's say, something's coming up, it's complicated, and she wants to make sure you're all prepared for the meeting. It is okay for a staff member to have individual briefings with each of you, so long as, information about how one of you plans to vote or one of you is thinking about voting isn't shared with the others. So I'm going to advance. And by the way, I should just say, if there are questions, I can't actually see you very well on my screen. I can't see all of you. So feel free to jump in if you have a question, and just unmute yourself and jump in. All right, so electronic communications have, of course, made the Brown Act more interesting and created this potential for an inadvertent meeting via email. One tip I always make is to avoid the reply all. So you might get an email from a constituent that's addressed to all 7 of you saying, hey, maps 5 and 7 are the best ones and you should really vote for them. I'm just giving an example here. And, you might want to reply to that constituent and say, thank you, noted, appreciate your input. But do not reply all to that email and say, oh yeah, I agree, those maps are the best. That would create a potential for a Brown Act meeting. So I say avoid reply all. Another thing that we are now more and more mindful of are social media tools. So and there's actually been some state legislation, recent legislation prohibiting members of a Brown Act body from discussing public business amongst themselves on social media. And this is actually, this was not a big surprise to me. And in fact, Jessica had already prepared and had the council adopt a social media policy that really tracks what state law, where state law went anyway. And it is pretty much intuitive that, you know, members shouldn't be discussing on Nextdoor or Facebook, whatever, you know, the topics that are coming within the, you know, their own jurisdiction. It is okay to answer questions from constituents, members of the public via social media, but talking to one another on social media, that is where the problems come up.
Catherine, this is Michael. I have a question about the example that you use. Is it an expectation that people will be contacting us through our personal emails, or we will get emails through the city and then the city contacts us? I'm unclear as to how that process works.
Thank you. Great question. And I am going to actually ask Jessica if she wouldn't mind answering that, if the committee members are going to be given city emails or if they'll be contacted through you.
So if there's anyone in the community that knows your personal email, they may reach out to you. And I would ask that if they do and it's on this topic matter and you reply, that you copy me so I can have it in our records. But typically emails will be sent to me and then I will then forward them on to the committee if we receive any on your subject matter.
Thank you.
But again, if there are interested members in the community who know you personally and know how to reach you, then they may just reach you that way as well.
This is Hal, and I have a question and thought as well. I'm wondering if it might be possible, rather than you know, worrying about, like, you know, email going back and forth, you know, to create a message board on the city's website, in which each of the committee members can receive comments from the public to the message board, which anyone in the public could read and could write to each other, and in response to those, because that would basically be in public 24 hours a day, accessible by everybody on the internet. I don't know if that question's ever come up, but I've always kind of wondered if that was a way of making sure that things are always visible to the public no matter what.
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting you ask about that that question, because some rules of the Brown Act, it seems like are a little bit archaic. You know, yes, this would arguably provide more transparency. The other hand, well, maybe not everyone has internet access, so they may not actually be able to see those communications. So, you know, what I've typically seen is if communications do come in, you know, and I don't know the scope of the communication that you all will be receiving over the course of your service, but those are, you know, transmitted. You know, Jessica's generally the keeper of all of those communications and transmits them to make sure, you know, you all get the communication from the public, you know, that's sent via email, and potentially, you know, a lot of times communications are attached to the agenda packets as well, so that, you know, the public can also see what communications have come in. So that's typically the way we've handled it. And, you know, things are evolving. So who knows, maybe someday that your message board idea will be a reality. But for now, it's we're a little bit more old fashioned.
This is Steve. Might I ask a related question to this? Because sort of a twofold question, which is our membership in this committee a matter of public record, number one, and number two, related to which, at what point, or like, are there members of the public who are part of this meeting tonight? Or if not, you know, is there a point at which our sort of discussions are in the public forum? And not having had experience with this sort of thing before, that might be an obvious thing, but I'd like clarification on both of those topics.
Thanks, Steve. Yes, your membership of this committee is public record. The names of the committee members are listed on the first page of the agendas. They are also listed on our webpage under the committee's page on our website, as well as there's a requirement from the MADI Act. It's called the MADI Act posting, where we list all committees and committee members, and that's posted on the board outside of City Hall. Each one of your meetings is open to the public. We do have a few members of the public on tonight's meeting, and we post the agenda and it gets sent out to various subscription lists that we have for people that are interested in city agendas. Some of the workshops we will be putting ads in the Half Moon Bay Review and, CoSide Buzz and KHMB, and trying to get, as many members of the public as we can to participate. And so there will be a section for public comments on each of your agendas, and there is one at the end of this agenda. If any of our public members in attendance would like to make any comments, we have that section as well.
Thank you.
Yes.
It looks like there might be another question before I move on.
I have a question. This is Claudia Marshall. Could we not post information in Spanish and the various shops and that cater to the Hispanic community, outlining what's going on? Because everything that you mentioned is all in English, and for our Latinx, they would be left out of that communication.
Claudia, thank you. We actually do translate most of our announcements into Spanish, and our public meetings are live interpreted. We have 2 interpreters on tonight, and any public mapping tools, any ads in the review, any of those things will be done in both English and Spanish. And we do reach out to some of our Latin community partners like the Latino Advisory Council and ALAS and some of those to make sure that we're getting the word out to that community as well. But yes, we absolutely do try and include everyone in the community.
All right, thank you.
Committee member, let's see, Phil Marshall, did you have a question, or is your hand still raised?
Yeah, I do. I just wanted to check something that I think I heard. I think I heard you say that if somebody writes to us via our personal email about redistricting, Jessica, you said that you'd like to be CC'd on the reply. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. And when Catherine gets to the Public Records Act portion, you'll kind of understand why, but we will need to keep records of all of that. So.
Okay. So likewise, if somebody asks a question on social media and we reply, does that mean we need to friend you?
No, it would mostly be for email correspondence that we would keep in the file. Social media, no.
Okay.
Fair question.
Great question. These are evolving areas of the law, I will say, and it's back when all these social media sites first started up, I remember advising clients just be much easier, just don't use social media at all, because it creates these public records and these records retention challenges when you start talking about city business on social media. Well, no one really liked that advice, and the reality is that the world is evolving in a way that that's just the reality that people do use social media. So we really can't, it's not feasible for us to keep every communication, that's made via social media on the topic of redistricting in Half Moon Bay. But, do be mindful of that, because we, of course, want to be, have a good file. And if you get questions from a member of the public via social media, maybe you can ask them, hey, could you put that in an email or send it as a comment to the city clerk, so that everyone can see, your comment, even people that are not on social media. Committee member Holt, I think, had a question.
Just really quick on that, maybe you could screenshot if you feel like it was a relevant conversation happening on social media and it needed to be in the public record.
Thank you. Yes, I've seen that done as well. All right, I'm going to move on to the next topic. There are some meetings that are not subject to the Brown Act. I'm not going to go into every single one of these, but just highlight a few. Contacts with individuals. So I'm going to give the example of the city council member because there's 5, which makes the math a little bit easier. So 2 city council members can speak to each other about a topic until they're blue in the face. But once they add a 3rd person on that topic, then it's a meeting that can only be discussed at a notice meeting. So there is an exception for contacts with individuals. However, still it's obviously have to exercise caution because you also have to be thinking about possibility that council member that if you pick to one of the committee member, they might talk to another one, and then all of a sudden you could get a quorum. So just be mindful of that when you're speaking with outside of the context of a noticed public meeting. There are other exceptions for if 4 of you happen to go to a conference or community meeting. That is okay. Just obviously be careful not to talk about redistricting business while you're at those events. It is okay to attend other committees and commissions at, within the city. But as you'll notice, you're not going to see any city council members at any of your meetings because while it arguably is lawful under the Brown Act, it wouldn't be appropriate under their council rules, which discourage attendance at commission meetings where they might have the potential to unduly influence or get ahead of the process. So that is, while an exception under the Brown Act, there's sometimes other factors that would come into play. All right, so I'm going to move on to, this is a sort of nuts and bolts. Regular meetings require 72 hours notice. Special meetings require a 24-hour notice. The notice, the agenda has to have a brief description of each item of business, and no action or discussion is allowed on non-agendized items. Let's see. There are some exceptions. A lot of times things will come up during public comment, and it may be appropriate for the committee to give a brief response or direct that person to staff for further information. But the committee should not have prolonged discussions on any topic that is not agendized. Other, key nuts and bolts is that the written materials must be made available. Public needs to be permitted to attend. And that's now available via Zoom, but if and when you are back in person, of course, folks need to be able to come into the room as well. And there may be time limits that, may be necessary. I'm not sure that this committee will have to worry too much about, having time limits, but, I think one of you mentioned that you've been attending city council meetings recently, and, some topics have brought a lot of folks to the meetings. And so while it's been customary to have 3 minutes per speaker, when there's a lot of speakers on a certain topic, then sometimes the mayor exercises his discretion and limits the amount of time to 2 minutes. Let's see. This, I think we've kind of already covered some of the COVID rules, but just to restate, we're allowed to have Zoom meetings for September 30th. Who knows if that will be extended or not. But that's of course allowed to, not required to. And so it sounds like, the committee may have discussions about having some in person, even potentially even before then. All right, consequences. So there is a potential to cure violations by having a do-over. That is generally able to cure most potential Brown Act violations. You don't tend to see a lot of litigation over the Brown Act, but of course it's best not to have to risk that. All right, so I have a few hypotheticals. We don't have the voting as I did this once before with when we had like the polling, which is kind of fun. So I think what I'll do, just in the interest of time, is maybe not hit every single one of them, but just do a few of these for fun, and I'll just answer the question unless I see some of you quickly raise your hand, and I will call on you. So the questions for these are, can these meetings happen without being noticed under the Brown Act? So the first one, the mayor holds monthly meetings open to everyone and publicized on the city's website. Does that need to be noticed under the Brown Act? The answer is no. It is okay for the mayor to go ahead and just do these. These are not a Brown Act meeting requiring 72 hours notice, and it's typical for these kinds of monthly meetings to occur. Well, what if the mayor specifically asks the chair of each commission to that meeting? Well, that's still okay, but maybe not the best idea for non-Brown Act reasons. Given that commissions are supposed to be independent, and under council rules, the council is not supposed to get ahead of that process or unduly influence those commissions. All right, well, number 3 is, well, all but one member of a commission attends to discuss a controversial issue with the mayor. What about that scenario? Would that require Brown Act notice? I'm seeing some heads nod. Yes, correct, it would. Because now you've got a quorum of your commission at a single place talking about a topic that's within the jurisdiction of the city, potentially within that jurisdiction of that commission. All right, so what if number 4, you've got 2 members from each of 3 different commissions, and they get together on their own initiative and they talk about potential overlap and synergy between their commissions. Let's see, would that be okay without Brown Act notice? I really, that's sort of a double negative way of asking. This is okay without Brown Act notice, provided that there was no quorum from any one of those 3 commissions. That said, query whether this is a great idea given potential for kind of mission creep and going beyond the scope of that individual commission. All right, number 5 is, something that could actually occur. League of Women Voters hosts a candidates forum, and all council members and candidates participate in the program, but sit separately. Does this require Brown Act notice? I'm seeing some heads shake. No, you were listening, thank you. This is okay to do without Brown Act notice. This is a community meeting hosted by a separate provider, and the key is that these council members are sitting separately, and they're only speaking on topics raised regarding the program. And I guess maybe I will just get through all of them since they're so fun. Number 6 is the city planning staff hosts a workshop to gather input about a proposed general plan amendment. All the council members participate in the program but sit separately. Is this okay without Brown Act notice? Yeah, I'm seeing some heads shaking. No, this is not okay without Brown Act notice. They should notice Brown Act notice this meeting. This is a city-sponsored event. There's no Brown Act exception, and it's not enough that they're just sitting separately. They really do need to notice that meeting. So those are my fun meetings hypos, and then I've got a few more on Zoom. I'm just gonna do the. Let's see. I am just gonna do number 2. It's kind of fun. May staff use of Zoom's breakout room function to allow for small group discussion during meetings. And probably most of you are familiar with the breakout function, but it allows a subset of the meeting participants to meet individually and then come back together. And I've actually never seen this done, but I wouldn't advise it. I'm not aware of any law on point on this topic, but it doesn't seem completely transparent because the public can't attend all of the breakout sessions, and so the public doesn't necessarily know what's going on. So I think I will stop there with the hypos on Zoom meetings, particularly since maybe we'll moving on to more in-person meetings. All right, so I've just got a little bit of content on the Public Records Act, and I think probably the key takeaways for you actually have to do with emails, since I don't expect that you'll be participating in production of documents in response to PRAs. But of course, this is the state's document retention and public records statute, and requires that public agencies provide to the public records unless they qualify for an exemption. Jessica is the keeper and the master of the city's public documents and responds to Public Records Act requests. Let's see, I have a few hypos here, which I think are going to get into this email question that has come up a couple times. So let's say the city commissioner sends an email to a handful of friends and neighbors saying, hey, the city commission on which I serve is considering an important issue on tonight's meeting. I hope you all can attend. So my first question, and you can just sort of nod your head or shake it. Will a member of the public be able to obtain the email that this commissioner sent under the Public Records Act Public Records Act? Yes or no?
Yes.
Correct. This is likely a public record. It is a topic of public business that was the topic of this email. All right, so, well, number two, well, what if this email was sent using the commissioner's personal email account? Is it still a public record? The answer would be yes, it is likely still a public record because it is discussing city business. So that is, this has actually been a topic of a fair amount of litigation recently regarding city council members' personal emails and texts and that kind of thing. So do keep that in mind. And then, well, what if the message was sent, and this came up earlier also, what if the message was sent via Twitter, Facebook, etc.? Well, it still is likely a public record. So, if you're communicating on city business, use your city email if you have one, or because I don't think you will be receiving one, copy Jessica on those communications so that it is a public record if there is a request that comes in that can be disclosed. All right, so number 4 was, well, what if the message was only sent to the commissioner's spouse? And here I said, well, this may not be a public record because there is an exception for if it's just personal business. Like, hey, I'm gonna be busy tonight. I've got this really important meeting. That might be closer to the line of just a personal communication and not actually city business. And then last one is, well, what if the message went on to explain how the commissioner intended to vote on the issue? Is this a public record? Yes, it's still likely a public record. Also, not a good idea because then that potentially can be forwarded on to others and potentially create Brown Act challenges. So that I think is my last. Yep, that is actually my last slide. So I'm going to stop my share here, but welcome to entertain any questions. I realize that was a very rapid overview of these 2 state laws. If you have questions, Jessica is certainly the expert on both topics, and she and I work together quite a bit on these 2 topics.
I have a question for you. This is Claudia. All of your hypos talked about commissioners, and we're an advisory committee. And so
you use my slide deck.
they apply to us as well.
Yes, it does. I didn't change all of the commissions to committee, but yes, you are a Brown Act body, and that's in your bylaws that you are subject to the Brown Act. So I confess I recycled this from the Planning Commission.
Okay.
And didn't
Yeah, I
change.
was a little confused on that. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that clarifying question.
Any other questions on that topic? And Catherine, thank you. And again, if anyone has any questions as we're going through the process, feel free to let me know, and happy to answer, and case by case as well. The hypos are, kind of good to make you think about it, but every once in a while you get a real hypothetical and you're not sure. So next, Jonathan, our Deputy City Clerk, will go over our 2018 transition.
Thanks, Jessica, and thank you, Catherine. Good evening, committee members. So I'm going to provide just a brief overview as to why the City of Half Moon Bay has district elections now. And let me share my screen. Okay. So in 2018, the city received a letter from a law firm in Southern California stating that the city was in violation of the California Voting Rights Act. And the allegation was that our overall electoral system within the city resulted in the disenfranchisement of minority voters, specifically Latinx members of our community, as the City of Half Moon Bay hadn't had a Latinx council member possibly ever, but at least within a couple of decades. This law firm had sent these letters to dozens of cities in California. And in April of 2018, just less than 2 months after that letter was sent to the city council adopted a resolution stating that the city would transition Half Moon Bay from its current at-large elections to district-based elections. So they were switching from every 2 years, instead of voting for 2 or 3 council members at large in the city, we would now be switching to districts. And the city switched primarily due to the threat of litigation. Some cities had challenged the lawsuits brought against them, and I can only think of one off the top of my head that was successful. Many of the cities paid hundreds of thousands of dollars, some even millions of dollars, and were forced to switch over to district-based elections. So the city decided that in the interest of the community, it was easier and better to switch to districts. The city hired National Demographics Corporation to consult in creation of a map, and the public was encouraged to create their own maps using the demographer tool that was provided by NDC. The city held 4 public meetings from May to August of 2018, and in September, a final map was adopted and approved by the city council. The map was only used once for the 2020 general election, where I believe districts 1 and 4 were up for election for the first time, but because of the 2020 census, we have to redistrict. And the map that we used, we could only use once, but the map that you're going to help create, that we will be using for the next 10 years until 2032. And just for reference, here is a picture of the map, the current map of the districts in Half Moon Bay. It's 4 districts with an at-large mayor. And you can see here in the map on the right side, it all converges downtown. But some of the requirements and rules for the new map have changed, and we won't be able to make quite the same map. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions on that?
One quick question.
Okay.
With respect to this and the previous slides shown to us, can we be sent a set of the slides and pages that were being shown here? It's much easier than taking a lot of notes.
Yeah, of course.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Paul, yes?
Yeah, thanks. Just to clarify, I think what you said right at the beginning. So the city council is expecting us to come up with one option, which is 4 districts, and one which is 5 districts, correct?
Correct, yeah.
And
And
is
then
that,
also the recommendation for the 4-year map on whether it should be a 2-year or 4-year at-large
Yeah.
elected mayor.
okay, so that is sort of fixed in stone, non-negotiable. We have to work within that limit.
Yes,
Although we can come up with as many options as we like for 4 districts or 5, but eventually we have to narrow down to one of each.
correct,
Right.
yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
May I follow up on Paul's question for one moment? Because, you know, is this a restriction as to the things that we can discuss and possibly bring forth if they're useful, or is it is it pretty much open to a variety of solutions that may not necessarily fit exactly with just those 2?
So by the time that we get the census information and the time that we have to draw maps and narrow them down to when the council has to adopt maps, there isn't really a lot of time to consider more than a few. And so what the council is looking for from you all is to go through all those options and the different variations and to narrow it down to them. They get an opportunity to then provide input on that map, the 2 draft maps, and then they come back to you to take the council's input and comments to then come up with the final 2 that are presented back to them. If, as we're going through the process, the committee felt very strongly that there was a different model that would best benefit Half Moon Bay, we could certainly go to the council and get their direction on that. It's pretty set in stone, but if the entire committee felt that there was a separate option that's within the legal abilities of us, we could take that to council and get their input on that throughout the process.
The reason that I ask is just specifically that ranked choice voting is becoming something I've seen more and more in use in different places. And it might be possible to present an option in which, across all the districts, there could be an option which produces a mayor or a representative from a district based on using ranked choice and district restrictions. So I just wondered if we investigated that and found something feasible to suggest to the council by some certain point when it's still practical to proceed toward maps, would that be within our purview to discuss? Which I think is kind of what Paul may have been asking.
I'll ask Shalise to respond to that one. I'm not sure that that's actually within the different laws that we have to prescribe to, but Shalise.
Yeah, I can address that. So when the city was faced with the CVRA lawsuit, the only way to have immunity from future CVRA lawsuits is to go to a by-district system. If you have a different system that is a combination system, say where maybe you only have 2 districts and then you have 2 council members in one of the districts or 2 council members in another district, that's a hybrid system that's subject to a CVRA lawsuit. Any ranked choice voting that's not by district, you could still do ranked choice or gosh, no, I can't think of the other ranked choice and the other voting system. Oh gosh, I can't remember the terminology right now. It's escaping me. But
first past the post.
I'm sorry.
Was it first past the post?
Yeah, the same concept.
Oh.
So if you did any of those systems and you kept your districts, you kept a fully by district system, that's acceptable. But if you did away with your districts, then you'd be open to a CVRA lawsuit. The city based that decision on whether to challenge the lawsuit or to convert to by districts to avoid a lawsuit. So for the very reason that they went to lawsuits, I think it would be highly unlikely you'd want to expose the city to to potential litigation, which it will happen.
Marin?
Just for Hal really quick, if you go to the Half Moon Bay website, there's a really nice the page district-based elections all about this with all the original documentation linked for the CDRA demand letter and all that. So it's all there, kind of what Jonathan just went over. But I have 2 points of just, I guess, clarification on the previous map that was made in 2018. It was made by the previous city council, I believe. Is that correct? And was it made using 2010 census data?
Yeah, yes.
So it was actually, we had demographer drawn maps, we had publicly drawn maps, and then the council went through a process of kind of narrowing down what they liked of each to come up with the final map. So it wasn't necessarily drawn by them, but they did, you know, they tweaked the final few maps to get down to the map that we adopted. And it was based on 2010 census data.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. So if no other questions on that, then I will turn it over to Shalise, who will.
Yeah, sorry, I did have a question.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, just to come back to Hal's question. I mean, I think he was asking about ranked choice voting in the context of, you know, choosing districts or not districts. But is it within our committee's purview to discuss and even recommend voting systems as well as district maps?
It's not, no. No, this committee's task is primarily focused on this post-census redistricting process.
Thanks.
I could clarify one thing which perhaps Phil you were referring to, and it was explained that nothing could satisfy the agreement and the laws other than districts in which members of the council are elected. And you know, what I had in mind was just the possibility that besides representing districts, if there's an election for an at-large mayor, you know, that somehow, you know, a district could send both, you know, the at-large mayor and a district representative who got less votes than the at-large mayor, you know, elected, and that the at-large mayor could be from any district and have the, you know, people compete for that, but not eliminate themselves from also the possibility, if not elected mayor, being elected a representative of a district. That was kind of, you know, the genesis of my thought.
So 2 things, and then Phil, if I wanted to add something to your question, we consolidate with the County of San Mateo Elections Division. And so the city actually does not choose our voting system. We use whatever voting system San Mateo County Elections uses. So that's an important note to make for that. And then how the way that the nomination period works is that you submit nomination papers and candidate statement forms for a specific seat. And so you would either run for mayor or you would run for your district seat. And you would either win or lose either of those, but you cannot run for concurrent offices.
Okay, I think I understood. Thanks, Jessica. So even for the at-large mayor, where the whole city would be voting, we would use first past the post because the county tells us to.
Is that, Shalise, is that? Okay, yeah.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, Shalise, go ahead.
Okay, can everyone see my screen? Got it? This is just a different format of what Jessica showed you as far as what we have up ahead. The Fair Maps Act is the law that governs the process for redistricting And it includes 4 mandated hearings. So in this case, the advisory committee will be holding 2 of those 4 mandated hearings. So when you see the terms workshop and hearings, you'll see that these presentations are going to look very similar because we're trying to glean the same information from the workshops and the hearings, but they're called hearings so that we have just checked that box that we've had the 4 mandated. So the next upcoming workshops will be August 12th and August 19th, and then 2 hearings, August 26th and September 2nd. And then as all of you are likely aware, the census data has been released. We should have had it past April, and we will not have it until, actually, they will not release the final form census data until September 30th, but on August 16th, we will receive the raw data that we'll need to begin working with the numbers. And when I say working with the numbers, I mean the state of California needs to work with the numbers because state law requires that the state zero out all the state prisons and reassign those prisoners to their last known home addresses. Then they will, the California statewide database will be releasing that census data, and we begin a 3-week waiting period before we can have this either the city or the committee or the committee's consultant release maps. So as Jessica said, it'll be heavy through August, 1st of September, and then there'll be kind of a cooling off period until we can actually start looking at physical maps. The good news is, however, because we recognize that the census, this is an abnormal time, and the census data is so delayed that NDC is providing population estimates. And we have put together those population estimates. Our hope is that those estimates will be close. One thing we know about estimates is they're always going to be wrong. We're hoping they're close as far as total population so that folks can start now once the mapping tools are available to begin drawing those maps. And our hope is the estimates will be close, and then just some final tweaks we'll need to make to population balance the districts, and everyone will have a jump on starting to draw their maps before we have the actual final data. Once we get the final data in the final census data in October, then we're asking the public to submit their maps by October 28th. And then NDC will professionally produce each map that's submitted. It's important to know this is a completely transparent process with full participation from any member of the public can submit a map. And we will professionally produce it and provide the demographic summary for each map. Then this committee will review the draft maps on November 8th and December 16th, and hold another workshop to select input from the community on those maps that this committee felt are their focus maps. So at all times, all maps will remain on the table, but come that December 16th, we're going to ask this committee to narrow them down to 3 to 5 focus maps. And what this does is it guides the public's attention to those maps. So rather than having to look at a dozen maps, now they can focus on 3, 4, or 5 maps that the committee thinks best represents what they've heard from the public and what they think best reflects the public. We'll ask for input on those focus maps. And then the first city council meeting to hear discussion of those draft maps will be on January 19th. And as Jessica said, we'll be asking the committee at that time to identify a 4-district map and a 5-district map that best represents the city for the council to consider on January 19th. Then the committee will host 2 more workshops to hear from the public on those 2 maps. Oftentimes what we'll hear from the public is maybe some minor tweaks they want made, some slight adjustments. We'll hit input on the election sequencing, as Jessica mentioned. And then the second public hearing will be on February 15th, and we're looking for adoption of the maps on March 15th by the City Council. And the final deadline to adopt required by statute is April 17th. And that should say 2022. My apologies. I will correct that. There are rules and goals that we need to follow when we're drawing the maps. The first, not change, the federal law's equal population based on the census data that comes out every 10 years. So as was already mentioned, the last time we went through this process 3 years ago, we had to follow the 2010 census data. And this time, of course, we'll be following the 2020 census data. However, we're following the 2020 census data that has been adjusted to reassign those state incarcerated persons. We must follow the Federal Voting Rights Act, meaning we can't draw boundaries in a way that would dilute the voting strength of our protected class groups. And when we're talking protected class groups, we're talking groups of residents or groups of people who have had their voting access denied, or they've been disenfranchised from the voting process in general. Typically for Half Moon Bay, we're talking about language minority groups. So we're talking the Hispanic and Latinx communities that have been disenfranchised. We also need to, when we're drawing the lines, we can have no racial gerrymandering, meaning you cannot draw lines solely based on race or ethnicity. It has to have other factors included when you're drawing a community. So when you're considering a community, you cannot look at solely race and draw the lines based solely on race, but instead look at culture, history, language spoken at home, things that bind the community together. The second column is very similar to the guidelines we presented 3 years ago when we were doing this for the first time going to districts. But now the law has changed to make these mandated criteria that must be used, and they must follow this prioritized order. So the first is geographically contiguous, meaning there must just be one single border for each district. You can't have Section A, Section B, Section C that are not contiguous. Second is undivided neighborhoods and communities of interest. This is important because we're going to be asking the public, we're going to be asking the committee members to tell us what their communities of interest are. And I have a couple slides that are just going to focus in on that communities of interest, but these are socioeconomic groups that should be kept together as long as they are in geographic areas that can be kept together. The third is easily identifiable boundaries. Often that's, major highways, major streets, railroads, canals, those type of things. And compactness, meaning we don't bypass one group of people to get to a more distant group of people. The city itself is there are some parts it's just not possible to be compact, and the term compactness in this case, as defined in the election code, means we do not bypass one group of people to get to a more distant group. And it's prohibited to favor or discriminate against a political party when drawing the maps. Now, once we've met these mandated criteria, we can look to the third column and look at other traditional redistricting principles. One of those main ones we want to look at is trying to minimize those voters that are shifted from one election cycle to another election cycle. So for example, if you have a group of voters that are planning to vote in 2022, because the last time they voted was 2018, and then you switch them to a 2024 election, then it will have been 6 years since they have voted. And then we also, if it's possible, to respect the voters' choices, let the voters decide who has earned re-election. And when we're talking about this, we're talking about if it's possible to draw a line that avoids head-to-head contests between incumbents, then we'll present those options and allow the voters to choose who has earned re-election, who has not earned re-election, as opposed to a demographer's pen deciding that the two council members are paired in the same district. We can look at future population growth and slightly underpopulate a particular district, but as was mentioned, it has to be near equal population. There can be up to a 10% deviation between the least populated district and the greatest populated district. And then also look at preserving the core of existing districts. That's a traditional principle that you could look at. It's not a mandate. I mentioned that NDC is providing some total population estimates. This is what we believe the total population estimate is going to be for Half Moon Bay. And again, we won't know for certain until October. You can see when we look at the deviation from the ideal. So we are out of population balance if these estimates hold true. So if you look at the where it says percent deviation, we're at 35.76 and we want to be at 10%. The thing is, when this is such a small jurisdiction, it only takes a few, it doesn't take much for those percentages to go down. It could be quite possible when the final estimates come in that you're near population balance with the existing districts. But for now, if the estimates hold true, you can see that there would need to be adjustment. If this committee found that the existing districts were exactly what they wanted, and our estimates hold true, you would not be able to draw the existing map the way it is presented because you would be out of population balance. I want to draw your attention to the citizen voting age population. This is a very important category when you're drawing districts or redistricting. This is citizen voting age population is defined as citizens, US citizens who are 18 years of age and eligible to vote. They are not necessarily registered to vote, but they are eligible to vote. That's different than the total population, which is the very first category on this page. The total population is all people, whether they are US citizens or not, and whether they are babies and eligible to vote or not. All people are in that top category. But when you're drawing maps and evaluating how good of a job you did at perhaps keeping a community together, a like-minded community together, and looking at not diluting the voting strength of our protected class groups, this citizen voting age population is one that's often examined and looked at by the courts if there is a challenge that lines were drawn perhaps to dilute the voting strength of those groups. You can see the percentage of Hispanics by district. You can see our highest district is in District 2 at 24%. And it's higher than the total average for the city is at 16%. When we present the tools, we'll be presenting two options, one for 4 districts and one for 5 districts. So we'll be asking the members of the public to submit maps 4 or 5 districts. If there's fewer districts submitted or more districts submitted, then we would not be able to consider adopting that map. So it needs to be either 4 or 5. If there's 4 districts, there needs to be about 3,183 people per district, and for 5 districts, 2,546. This map is based on data collected from the American Community Survey of where our Latino eligible voters reside. It's color coded, and you can see if it's green, yellow, or pink, that means that 50% more of this particular area is populated or has citizens voted, it's members who are citizens voting age are Latino. You can see mostly in Districts 2 and Districts 3. We don't have any other protected class groups that have high concentrated areas that reside in concentrated geographical areas. I don't have other maps for the other protected class groups to show you. Other socioeconomic demographics that we can show, on the left, I'm showing households with at least 1 child at home. And then on the right is showing households that rent their homes. So those are renters on the right. And oftentimes things like this will help to find a community of interest. So we're talking about defining neighborhoods, and the purpose of these initial pre-map workshops is to hear from the community. We want to know what your story is, what defines your neighborhood. what are the boundaries? Because remember, ultimately, everything has to be translated into a map. So it's difficult to get folks when they're commenting to focus, but if we can guide their comments and ask, okay, you're defining this area, what, and oftentimes folks will give a generic name to a neighborhood. It's good to ask, what do you see those boundaries being for that neighborhood? And it's surprisingly different for different residents. So it's good to ask for the geographical boundaries, ask if there are other things that combine or that, you know, bind a neighborhood, such as a highway, hills, major concerns, flooding, fire, all those types of things are often things that combine different communities, areas around parks or schools, other landmarks. And then we can also turn to zoning records and other planning records if we don't get enough public testimony to help define what the neighborhoods are. And then beyond neighborhoods, there are other things that bring communities together. I know that when we were first doing the maps, we were talking about unpopulated areas, some of the downtown areas and other business areas. Would they benefit from being in a single district, or perhaps having more than one district touch their areas so they have multiple representatives? So we also want to hear about those non-neighborhood communities and what brings those together. Are there certain county or city policies that brought them together? And again, we want to just make sure that communities of interest cannot include relationships with political parties, incumbents, or political candidates. Actually went in 2020 defined what a community of interest is. And it's important to note that a community of interest is a population that shares common or social or economic interests, as we have mentioned, but also that should be included within a single district for purposes of its effective and fair representation. So there could be an instance where perhaps it doesn't benefit that community to be in a single district for its fair and equitable representation. So when we're thinking about communities of interest, we need to add that test to it. We will be providing the full range of mapping tools available to the public so they can draw maps, and we will start with simple tools just to review maps. Those are not necessarily map drawing tools. And then we will have an easy to use Draw Your Neighborhood tool. We'll have paper-based maps so people can actually take a piece of paper if they're not comfortable using any of the online tools, and then a data-rich draft a map tool. Story map, some of you may be familiar with Story Map. It's similar to PowerPoint, but it's more interactive, and you can overlay different maps, and any map basically that has a shapefile to it and districts will be loading in here. This is example of land use and zoning from this sample is from Goleta, but we will do the same for Half Moon Bay. We can also overlay different maps that have government districts such as school districts and different water districts, fire districts, those type of things. We will have an online interactive review map. If you were part of the process last time, you probably were familiar with this. As maps get submitted, we populate it onto this online interactive review map. And you can look at the various maps that were submitted. You can even overlay them. And we can have other layers that you can activate, again, such as maybe school attendance zones, those types of things. This is a sample of the public participation kit. We intentionally don't show Half Moon Bay because we don't have it prepared yet. We don't want people to start drawing maps, but what it is we divide the city into population units and provide the population count for that particular unit. So you can see here, this is this population area is bounded by this particular area is 2,221 people for this example here. So folks can do their own math. They can draw their districts and add them up and get close to what they need to for their districts. If you're familiar with Excel, you can take the paper map and translate it into an Excel spreadsheet that will do the population map for you, and it will show you the citizen voting age population data. To use this map, you need the sister paper map, which has those population unit numbers consecutively numbered 1 through however many units there are, say 1 through 70. Then you would open up the Excel. And for example, if you had, say this entire area was in District 1, say those are numbered 1 through 30, you just open up Excel and assign those population ID numbers 1 through 30 to the appropriate district. If that's your District 1, you'd put 1 in that column. And then there's the results page that shows you, does the map work for you. We'll have District R, which is a simple paintbrush tool. So you will activate the paintbrush and you just draw in the map. One good thing to know when you're drawing maps is the smallest unit of geography that we can use is the census block. Sometimes census blocks are a normal street block, what you would imagine walking around the block. But as you know, Half Moon Bay is not made up just entirely square blocks. So some of the census blocks are very large, especially in the non-populated and sparsely populated areas. So when you're using your paintbrush tool, and if you touch a census block that's very large, for example, likely on this map, this whole area would be 1 census block. It will, even though I just wanted to maybe go right here, it would highlight all of the census block. That's how all the mapping tools work. I often get people saying, I wanted to draw a straight line and my line ends up being jagged. It's because it's whatever census block you're touching, it will highlight. And that's the way the final map has to be. It has to follow the geography of census blocks. And then the most powerful tool is the Maptitude online redistricting. It's made by Caliper. And this particular map gives you all kinds of data on basically any category, any category you can imagine. You know, language spoken at home, renters versus homeowners, all types of information per district. And what's great about it is the public can draw maps and share those maps. And they just share them to the same portal, name them a name. And if you like someone's map, but you want to maybe tweak it, you can start with their map as your base map and make changes. We will also be uploading the existing district boundaries there. So if there's some elements you like about the existing map, you can use the existing boundaries as your base and change the boundaries from there. It will let you know if your population balanced and your how out of balance or imbalanced you are, and then you can also check the citizen voting age population for each district.
Do we have sorry, do we have some sort of, I don't know, an intuition about how much, for example, of the census blocks is going to change from the last census to this one? Or, you know, or what kind of variation we're going to be seeing in this? Because you said you've already prepared estimates.
Yeah, we do know that, and we're finding in many of the cities that the census block geography has changed somewhat, and we're hoping it hasn't changed much in Half Moon Bay, but we are seeing changes in actual geography of the census blocks. But as far as numbers, the difference from the map that was adopted, we showed the total population at 11,324. And in 2020, we're estimating 12,730. So we're estimating there's been an increase since 2010 of about 1,400 residents. So when we went to, and that's a good question, I can show you this slide. These are the existing districts, and we're showing that District 1 is slightly underpopulated if we were to keep the 4 districts. So right now we're assuming that this is a 4-district model. It's slightly it's underpopulated by almost 6%. District 2 would be way overpopulated. District 3 would be way underpopulated. And District 4 is at 6.39. So there would need to be some adjustments virtually in each of the districts to get them, if our estimates hold true. But when the population is so small, it only takes just, you know, it doesn't take much for these percentages to change, obviously. I mean, 1% is, you know, just over 300 people. Yeah, does that make sense?
I have a question while you have this back up, which I appreciate seeing again, because I had wondered if you could help me to understand, you know, whether the differences in District 4, you know, are both appropriate and you know, or valid, you know, and just how to understand, you know, the shaping of districts with, are they supposed to be fairly similar, or are we supposed to strive to create, you know, great variation from district to district, because there's one district which is very different than the others.
When you're talking, are you talking?
Was that just dictated by the contiguous?
In these categories, are you speaking of these categories?
Yeah, I'm speaking of the Hispanic distribution in District 4 is such a small percentage compared to the rest of the city. And is that just dictated simply by geography and nothing else?
It's dictated by geography, but definitely when maps are drawn, they're trying to get a higher percentage in a particular district. So this is very common that you would have overall, you have 16%, but you would have one district that is 6%, because maybe this is where mostly of your white population resides in the District 4 area. And that's meaningful because assuming that you have your Latinx voters, assuming they all vote similarly, you would want to boost these percentages here so that they would have a chance at getting someone elected. So that's the whole purpose of going to districts, is to try to group like-minded communities together. And one of those considerations is also race and ethnicity.
But if you made an assumption that a district voting for one person, that as large a group as 24% voting in a unitary way against a group as small as 67% could ever win, that's clearly not possible. There have to be other factors if something like that's going to happen. I just wonder if there's an inherent contradiction in some of these criteria.
Well, and that's often the arguments that are raised, right? Because you don't have a very high percentage of Latinx eligible voters in your community. So it's hard to get a majority district. You know, many Southern California cities, we're seeing this percentage to be in the high 30s or 40s, and it's easy to get a majority district. And so, you know, that's why Santa Monica fought their case, because they felt like the Latinx community was better served at large, but they are still battling that argument. They won on appeal, and then the Supreme Court depublished the opinion of the appellate court, and is going to the Supreme Court. So
I think it's important also to understand that there are potentially two sort of city planning objectives working at cross purposes, in a sense, because what we're doing is actually, we're mandated with reflecting the reality of what is actually expressed in the households of Half Moon Bay. And there's probably a whole separate, maybe even parallel effort to try and find out whether you could more evenly distribute the actual people who are living in different areas and kind of make areas more heterogeneous. But the reality is that's not actually what's going on, and it's our responsibility to reflect what's actually going on in the homes of the community. So I think if the numbers are telling us that people are living in certain areas, it's up to us to make sure that they are well represented in those areas, is what I'm hearing. So there's kind of a little bit of cognitive dissonance from what we would want Half Moon Bay to look like versus maybe what it actually looks like, and we have to actually work on what it actually looks like.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting to note as well that if you look at the map that was adopted in 2018, that's posted on the Half Moon Bay website, you can see the data that was used at that time. And when you compare it to what we're looking at right now, there is a significant change, especially in the population of District 2 and of District 4 and the demographics of those. So I think it bears looking back at some of that data before we jump into this and just notice those changes.
I have two questions. First of all, the data points are very interesting. I really appreciate this and look forward to getting them sent to us. But my first question is, I did not hear anything about the homeless population. How is that group counted?
So the homeless, let me get you a better at the Census Bureau's official response on that, but it's my understanding they do their best to count all people, and I'm not sure what their work plan entailed as far as counting the homelessness, but it's the federal census that undertakes that endeavor. Jessica, I don't know if you had a lead person from the city that was working with the census on complete count, but the complete count organizations, one of their charges is to make sure that they count those folks that are hard to count, including the homeless.
We can get a better answer before the next meeting, but from what I understand is there were groups that would go to the encampments to do the complete count and try and get as many of the unhoused population as they could.
And does that mean, Jessica, that we will be able to see some data points, some numbers on that, just like we were with the racial groups? So we can see how many homeless are in each of the districts currently? Are we going to get that kind of detail, or that is not available?
Yeah, I don't believe that we have that data. I know that we, as far as housing status, we have single family, multifamily, rented and owned. I have not seen that be a category, but I can ask if it's possible for us to add that, to get data on that.
Okay. My next question is, I like all the information as relates to the tools that could be used to draw the maps and how people could, put their own ideas forward. And obviously, the more data we have, the better, as far as I'm concerned. But my question is for our public, are we going to be providing them some tutorials as to how these tools are used, or they're just expected to know this?
We'll be spending more detail in upcoming workshops. We do have written guides, as well as we can provide some links to some other video tutorials that were done on how to use them. So you'll see at the upcoming workshops, we're actually going to go into some mapping tool trainings.
Okay, would those workshops be done in our regular scheduled workshops, or these are things that are done preparing for the workshops? For example, the senior center, will there be a group that's going to go to the senior center to get those folks prepared for the meeting so they can come in prepared, or are we using the time that are on our schedules to actually for a training as well?
So we do have a mapping workshop built into your schedule. And what we did last time is we also created paper maps, and we did go around to some groups. Jonathan, help me remember who all, but I know we did go to the senior center, and we, during one of their lunches, Jonathan and I stood up and we explained how you fill out the map and gave them copies, explained how, you would turn them in. We spoke with a few other groups.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly how many, but yeah, we did go out to Jonathan, do you recall any others?
And some of the housing developments as well. And various neighborhoods.
So if I hear that correctly, the city will respond and provide resources to educate groups in how to use the tools.
Absolutely.
Without the committee members needing to participate in those trainings for groups.
Well, those will be separate. Those will be staff led, but there is a committee workshop. That's a committee meeting that will go
Right.
over the mapping process.
But if there's a lot of demand within the city that surfaces, that the city staff will just try to fulfill meeting that, which is
Correct.
great.
Correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, staff.
So I had a question that is a kind of a hypothetical to try to understand the different priorities between allocating across total population or across citizen voting age population. You know, so if just hypothetically the city were to be divided into 2 districts, you know, would they try to be of equal size in total population or of equal size in total citizen voting age population?
Total population.
Thank you.
And actually, that concludes my presentation. If we have members of the public, oh, I'm sorry. Scrolled myself right out of it. We definitely want to hear, you know, what defines their neighborhoods, hear from the community. And then again, I can answer any questions about the mapping tools. But what we're wanting to hear eventually from this committee is actually defining what those communities are. So the input we hear from the public and what this committee believes those neighborhoods are. I mentioned AB 849 here. That is the Fair Maps Act, and with communities of interest being one of the prioritized criteria we must follow, that is not as apparent as geographically contiguous and those type of things. We need to define the communities of interest that we've heard at these meetings. So just keep that in mind. We'll want to, at upcoming meetings, you'll see on the agenda, and perhaps we even have a line item to hear from the committee on discussion of the communities of interest and the compositions of the district. So we're focused on getting actually documented what those neighborhoods are, what those communities are that should be kept in single districts for their fair and effective representation. And that concludes my presentation. And again, I can be happy to answer any questions. Jessica, I don't believe this is one of our official public hearings, but I know that if we have members of the public, it would be appropriate to hear from them.
Yeah, I did place a public comment section on the agenda. So if there are any members of the public that would like to address the committee, please use the raise your hand feature. Okay, Bill Balson.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank everybody for your contribution and volunteering for this. One of the things I found going through the previous exercise a few years ago is this is a great example of the knapsack theorems out of mathematics. So Phil probably knows what I'm talking about. It's a very lumpy community. We have a lot of communities like individual communities up and down the coast, and people like to be part of that community. So I'm sure you'll hear from a lot of those communities as we move along. Thanks.
Thanks, Phil. Okay, and I don't see any other hands raised. So would the committee like to nominate a chair and vice chair at this point? Would you like me to place that on the next agenda?
I would like it placed on the next agenda, please.
I would agree with that too.
Okay.
Could you also speak to what the chair and vice chair, what that entails, and what our expectations would be of that? And so what should we be looking for?
Sure. Yeah, good question. Thanks. So the chair would call the meeting to order, as I did tonight, ask for the roll call, and then basically lead the committee through the meeting. So go, begin each agenda item, lead discussions, kind of keep order of the committee, run through the public comments. So basically just sort of manage the flow of the meeting, make sure that we're keeping on track. And then the vice chair is next in line in case the chair is ever absent. Does that kind of make sense to everyone? Sort of like if you've watched any of our council meetings, what you see the mayor do, or planning commission, parks and rec, they both have chairs as well. It's basically just that of kind of what I've done tonight would normally be the chair's responsibility.
So part of what you did tonight, Jessica, was set the agenda, which is something the chair normally does. Can you comment on that? Will the agenda be preset by the staff?
It will be, yeah, and that's because we have very specific, items for each meeting, and a very specific task. So yeah, we do set those agendas, and if you look at the meeting calendar, I also try to include what most of the meetings were for, and so that can kind of give you an idea of what your agendas might look like.
Is there a requirement for a permanent chair and vice chair, or is that something that can basically be assigned on a per meeting basis?
I suppose that we could. I'd probably, if Catherine's on, I'd probably look to her. I know that it's in the bylaws that we nominate a chair and vice chair, but yeah, we certainly could just have a different one, and then you all get the opportunity to have that experience. We could just rotate throughout each meeting. Is that okay, Catherine?
Yeah, I don't see a problem with that. Let's double check the bylaws just to make sure it didn't say, one chair only, but.
Right. Yeah, and I don't think it does, but.
I just think it would give, as far as participation is concerned, it might give, we might throughout the course of the tenure of the committee give, everyone an opportunity to do it, just because why not,
Yeah, no, that's a great suggestion, and it makes a lot of sense for this group, especially given the, the limited term of once we adopt the maps, this group would disband. And so that actually makes a lot of sense. And we could just simply do it in the order, roll call order, which is alphabetical by your last names. And those are the names listed on the agenda. And so, to make it easier and for everyone to kind of know when they show up as chair, we could just do it in that order as well.
If we do have a rotating chair, can I ask, would you make yourself available to do a little bit of training for us, Jessica? Some of us may not have run a meeting before, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd be happy to meet with that meeting's chair, prior to, like, once we're putting the agenda together and everything's coming out, to talk about the flow of the meeting, because each meeting is going to be different depending on the topic. And yeah, myself and Jonathan and Catherine, we're here to help for any questions and needs that you guys have to help you get through this process. Absolutely.
So I have a question, not on the chair question, but generally in shaping agendas for future meetings. If each of us wish to communicate by writing to you, and you would share with the entire group, communications via email to discuss things like what to put on the agenda, or questions about, meetings, and, I don't know if there's any flexibility in the meeting schedule based on different people's, what comes up for them. I see Thursday nights were chosen, an activity came up for me that I'm sacrificing tonight, which is fine. I'm happy to give up some activities for this, but something that I used to do on Friday nights just recently moved to Thursdays, and I don't know if it's convenient, for the committee to consider the possibility of meeting on a different night than Thursdays in the coming month or two.
Yeah, unfortunately, both with the, as you heard Shalice mention earlier, they're helping about 300 cities through this process right now. So I've seen Shalice's calendar from now until May, and basically every single day is booked for her. So it was also, you know, making sure that we got all the meetings set out, that we would have a demographer. It was also thinking about council meetings, planning commission meetings, Parks and Rec commission meetings, you know, BPAC, Main Street Bridge, like all of the different committees and commissions that we have, which nights would work best. And as far as agenda topics, also, you know, there's a process that we go through here, and there's a lot of legal requirements with what each meeting entails. And so that meeting calendar is pretty solidified. And it's understandable if not every committee member can make every meeting. As long as we have a quorum, that's good. And we hope that you can make every meeting, but it's understandable that there's going to be scheduling conflicts.
The one question I have related to that also, if I may, is this fixed to evenings? Because in general, we have a committee of people who, this is summer and most are retired as well. So is it possible to consider daytime meetings?
Well, we do have a couple Saturday afternoon meetings, but what I found in, you know, the past 6 years of working for this city is that when we do schedule daytime meetings, we get a lot of flack from our residents that commute over the hill. And that's also why the meetings are at 7. And so when we think about going back to in person, we think about, you know, we want as much public participation in this process as we can possibly get. And so making sure that we're accounting for students that are in school and people that are working over the hill, and, you know, people that are working during the day. And so typically in Half Moon Bay, when we've scheduled daytime meetings, we get a lot of flack from the public.
It is sort of an unusual time for the next month or two, plus it's still summer, so perhaps it's not as much the case at this particular moment, whereas in the fall, I imagine it would be more the case. But thank you.
I think it's helpful for younger people to get involved in the democratic process, to have things in the evening, because we are still working. So it's a good time for me, at least.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I had one. So I just wanted to say thank you for the presentation, Shalice. I thought that was really, really helpful. A great start for this. I can imagine, you know, questions occurring to me between now and the next meeting. And so maybe this is one for Catherine, and because it's a Brown Act thing, potentially. What should we do with these questions? Should we just save them up to the next meeting so that we can ask them in public and everyone can benefit? Or, you know, do we get to contact our demographer in between times? Or what's the best thing to do?
I can share Shalice's email with everyone, but what I would suggest is that you email, and even me, I can get them to Shalice, but if you email us your questions ahead of time so that we make sure that we're fully prepared if there's any research we need to do to get, you know, the correct answers or anything like that, and then we would address them at the meeting for everyone's benefit, both on the committee and the public. But it's certainly helpful if you know questions ahead of time to send them to us so we can make sure we're fully prepared to answer them.
Great. So by us, do you mean you, Jessica, and you, Shalice, together?
Yeah, or even if you just send them to me, I can make sure that Shalice gets them.
Good. Okay. Right. Yeah. Thank you.
And I just had one follow-up question for Jonathan. Jonathan, you and I had been communicating because I had some questions about the Form 700.
Yes.
Should I still contact you about those questions?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And I guess I have one last question for Jessica, and that's how many of you are there actually? I believe we must have 3 or 4 Jessicas working for the city, because I don't know how you get everything done that you have to do.
Just one. But yes, thank you. So I think this was a good first meeting. And again, thank all of you for being here. And I can tell this is going to be a really well thought out process. You guys have come up with some really good questions tonight, and I love that you're thinking about it and want to give this your best effort. So thank you for that. And let's see, for our next meeting is, my computer is running a little bit slow. Yeah. Yeah, pages are not showing up. I believe it's August 8th. Is that correct, Jonathan?
August 12th.
August 12th?
Yeah, 12, and then to the next, then the 3 Thursdays following the 12th.
Right, the 4 back-to-back Thursdays. Okay. So I'll be in touch with that agenda, and if we go in the order on the agenda, then Hal would be our chair for that meeting. Hal, are you able to attend that one?
Yes, I am, and I can do that.
Okay, so we'll touch base, you know, about a week or two before that meeting, and I'll let you know everything that's going to be on the agenda and how it'll flow. And you'll be seeing a lot of outreach from us. There's a news release that will be going out on Monday, I believe, just announcing that the committee has formed, what the tasks will be and how we'll be moving forward. You'll see a lot of advertising for that first workshop, because that's our mapping workshop. So as you see those things, please share them with your network, share them with the people that you know. Again, we want as many people as we can get at these meetings. So Bob, did you want to say anything before we adjourn? No? Okay. So I think that's it. And again, thank you, and we'll see you in a few weeks.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank-
Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
And everyone.